Okay, so we have let everybody in, and then everyone else who will join later, we will let them in as soon as they join. So thank you all very much for joining this community event, and thank you especially to our guests for joining the panel. Today we have three prestigious guests, even though they're not exactly guests, as they are all members of the community, and you may have seen comments from all of them from time to time. So I will do a quick round of introduction, and then we can dive in. So I want to welcome Jessy Ouellette first, who is VP of Engineering at Dash Hudson. Welcome, Jessy.
Thank you.
I also welcome Emanuele Blanco, who is Engineering Director at Wise, and whom I'm happy to see on video for the first time, as we said, after chatting together for a long time. Welcome, Emanuele.
Thank you, Luca. Great to be here.
And last but not least, extremely happy to have Luis back. Luis Bennett was executive in residence at Reforge until very recently. And you may remember also him because we already ran an event together. We wrote an awesome article together that people loved. So welcome, Luis, again.
Thank you, Luca. Good to be here, everybody. Nice to see you.
So today's panel is about a niche topic that is hiring, this thing. And we brought in people who have vast experience in this. But of course, this is, jokes aside, a very broad topic. So we have a few questions lined up that I wrote down in advance for you guys from the panel, but I'm happy, as I told you, to have a free-flowing conversation where we pick up the most interesting things and angle that may come up in conversation and just follow this. For everybody, the event will run for about 1 hour. We are recording this and we will publish this both in the community and in our channels, in YouTube, etc. And we will keep some time for Q&A at the end of the panel. I don't know, Chi, maybe you can. I don't know who is talking. Maybe you can mute yourself. Okay, we can start. It was nice singing anyway. That nice background.
It's Giamacca. Oh my God. Okay, this was
nice.
good.
Nice, Chi.
I'm sorry, I didn't know I was not muted.
It was very nice, actually. I mean, it was really nice. So we can start. I mean, the first question that I want to make, it is like to address the elephant in the room that we cannot ignore, that is based on the current situation in the market, because I think that when we decided to have this panel, it was a few months back. Situation was already kind of bad, but maybe not this bad. There are now also the Google layoffs, and of course big tech gets all the headlines, but also late stage startups and mid-sized companies are laying people off. So I have a very broad question that is, how do you plan for hiring the right way? I mean, how do you know you need more engineers? How do you make sure you're not hiring too many of them? What are the signs based on your experience that you're making the right choice, the right investment to let new people in? And maybe conversely, if there are some, false signs that you should not follow, where if you hire more people, you're just doing worse. Anybody feel free to start, and then we go ahead.
Yeah, I can start. I'll give a bit of background on the way we were hiring at Dash Hudson for the past 2.5 years or so. We've been in a growth phase and trying to increase our revenue, and part of that is building more software faster, which requires more people. But our philosophy around that was always been to find the right person. So we never looked to fill a seat. We had a evergreen position for a senior developer. That was kind of our entry point that we were looking for. We did hire some people that were not senior developers, but it was a good way for us to see who has that potential, or they feel like they can be at that level. So this was for almost 2 years that we were kind of like hiring at that level. And like I said, we were picky. And then for the to kind of feed the bottom with junior developers, what we did is that we would have every term, we work with a university closely here in Halifax in Canada, and we would have 5 to 6 interns every term. So over a year, it's like 15 to 20 interns. And out of that, we picked the best ones, and we've hired, I think, around 15 developers over the past 2-3 years.
Wow.
Junior developers that were interns with us. We find that as a really good way, because they spend 1 term or sometimes 2 terms with us, because when they're still early in their career or in their studies, they have more than 1 co-op or term with the with different companies, and we ask them to come back if they're great. And then, you know, when we hire them as juniors, sometimes they've been with us for 8 months already. So that junior phase doesn't last a year. Usually it's a few months, and they're like, you know, they're a full like intermediate developer at that point. So that's been helping us grow, you know, people from the bottom, but also bring the senior talent from the top. And because we didn't hire faster than what we could afford, what happened about a quarter, so 4 months ago, when everyone was having layoffs, all we had to do is just pause on hiring. So we haven't been hiring since then. We haven't grown. All the teams were the right size, because we try to keep about 5 developers per manager. So all the teams were in the right size. We did backfill if someone left or if we had to let someone go, but we haven't been hiring as the level that we're hiring. So that's why we were able to basically not have to lay off anyone. We weren't growing outside of our means, but the market coming up will definitely change things, and we're ready to grow again. But our approach, I think, is going to be a bit different than before.
That's a great strategy, actually. I've long thought that internship are a very and you know, picking people from university is very underrated strategy, and investing on training them to, you know, to have a shorter hiring cycle and bringing good people. And it's also healthy from the team, because it gives, you know, senior people chance to grow themselves by mentoring others. So it's I love this.
We also find it's a good way to find diversity as well, where we get a bigger pool coming from their internships, and we can focus on hiring, you know, female developers or people of color or work with disabilities. So it really helps us to bring that talent that you don't necessarily see at a senior level, because the industry hasn't been at that phase where you have that many diverse people at the senior level.
Yeah, that's a great angle. It's true. It's true. Luis, Emanuele, you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the systems that I've seen be the most resilient for these kind of economic gyrations, for lack of a better word, are ones that employ discipline, really alignment at the executive level that then enters the organization. And sometimes it can be to your advantage to be a bit, quote unquote, behind on hiring. The same way, like, you're essentially, the larger you get, the larger the boat you're steering is. And if you're trying to hire someone, like, especially if you're in a place like Europe that has a huge notice period, you have to plan for what you think the organization is going to be and what you think the economy is going to be in several months. And like, nobody knows with reasonable accuracy what either really is going to be. So there's a certain amount of guesstimation that comes into it. I found part of that discipline is actually going through the kind of tedious effort of counting the seats, ensuring your organization is aligned on how many people you're going to hire and at what role, so that you're not making wrong hires. Because it's like, oh shit, we're way over indexed on junior talent. You end up in a situation of like, oh, now we need to change the composition of our team, which is effectively a layoff, or like people will glorify it as performance management or something else like that. But that ain't good. And then I think also there's something around the balance of just accepting that part of a business that can't always be good times. If you're going to grow as quickly as you think is prudent, because you can't predict the future, you have to be able to tolerate the fact that sometimes you're going to get it wrong, and that's a very expensive act. You're always going to have to do the best that you can in the time, but you're actually going to, try to say this without profanities, you put organizations at risk by kind of dragging your feet on doing something like a layoff. It's not to say like layoffs are fun. Trust me, I've done them, they're awful. But being in a position to be prepared to dial back hiring immediately to prevent yourself from being in a layoff is the most ideal state you can be. And that requires like constantly thinking like, okay, how are we doing as a business? Like engineering can't live on a separate planet from the rest of the business. It has to be really tightly ingrained so that if you say like, oh shit, like our revenue is dropping precipitously right now, like you need to either pivot to a place where you can get revenue coming in or start looking really critically at the expenses you have as a business.
Yeah. No, totally right. And I think rightfully so. I mean, we always talk about the impact of layoffs on people who are actually being laid off. But layoffs leave a lot of scars and problems, even in, teams and people who are left in the team. Bad morale. There is a percentage of people who quit their job after layoffs. There are many studies about there is like this additional percentage of people who leave anyway. People are left unsure about the future of maybe their area or their team that is left with way less people than before. So it's not just about, it's not just bad for people who are laid off, of course, who are the most impacted, but the whole company suffers a lot for that. So if you put yourself in a situation of never having to go there, it's supremely important. I agree. Emanuele, you want to add anything?
I mean, no, what Jessy and Luis is very truthful. Like, I do believe that as well. I think it's very important to establish, like, even when you're going up across many, if you look at layoffs, right, apart from the big techs who have done that, which, they may have their own reasoning regarding how the revenue is going and the profit per headcount and all of that. There's been many cases in which, like, historically, over the past few years, we've been exposed to a company which had very easy access to capital, and as a result had interesting fundraising round, probably evaluation, which were even like a bit not necessarily tied to reality, although what's reality really is like the price that people are willing to pay. And I think, it's good, junior being prudent. That's very, very important because, like that will allow you to absorb. But if you go and hire a lot of senior folks based on some revenue projection, and then, a war starts or energy prices are going up, like Black Swan, COVID should have taught something to people, I think, in terms of like preparing for the unknown. And I think it's what Luis was saying, that really have that tight feedback loop, in particular with your finance team. I appreciate most of the engineers maybe don't have enough visibility, but companies who are transparent in terms of the share internally, like how they're going, what's the revenue projection and all of that. Some companies may not be possible if you're public, like I work at a public company. So, we need to be careful about the information we give out to people because it may affect stock price and all of that. And it's not even legal. Yes. But, it's, I think being prepared, you always need to have the right balance in which you haven't gone too far. And yes, ideally you would slow down, you would freeze, you don't have to go that way. But at the same time, it's sometimes you as a business, that's the right choice for everybody, right? I mean, you think about the people laid off, you need to feel also about the whole company. Like sometimes you have a risk, you don't lay off people, maybe the company will go under. It could go under, and that's an even worse outcome. And I appreciate that, it's a tough topic, but it's reality's business. And, like we need to keep remember that we don't live in a world where everything is free money. And, like we need to prepare and, do our homework, I think. So that's why we can prevent the impact of layoff to be too big, in my opinion.
Yeah. I do agree that transparency with finance helps because we are pretty transparent. We're still a startup. We're not public, so we can share the revenue. And every Monday, when you see that the growth curve is slowing down and it's plateauing, the team will understand when we tell them we can't hire anymore because we're preventing layoffs later, right? I think it helps to share that information. We hire smart people; they can understand it. It's not that complicated.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, tight feedback loop and transparency, I agree, are key. And then, of course, I mean, you may have different strategies, right? You may be more tight, and so like just doing hiring freezes, or you are very aggressive, like big tech in recent months, and then just like you had a big expansion, you might be prepared for layoffs. But I think in the end, I mean, the tighter strategy, especially for companies that are, normal companies like the rest of us, not just the Googles of the world, is the more healthy and, prudent strategy. So I agree with all of you guys. And so this was a very strategic angle, looking also at the market. I may go down now to something that is a little bit more practical. A few months ago, we ran a survey to the readers of Refactoring and asked them among the various things, what was the most stressful part of changing jobs for them? And the majority of people said was the interview process for various reasons. I mean, they said it's overly long, or it tests for the wrong things. I mean, it's like puzzles and things that have nothing to do with the actual job. You're left hanging with no communication. I mean, very many complaints. So my question for you is, what does a good interview process look like for you? I mean, how do you balance, for example, making it fast and making it good and selective the right way?
I think for me, it starts from the outset when you know what you're looking for from a levels and skills perspective, why it is relevant to the job, and then you decide and work with others to figure out how you're actually going to interview for that. It sounds a lot easier than it is, but then you should be prepared at any point to answer a candidate's questions of why is this question relevant for the job. So you're not, well, even if you are doing something like, how many golf balls fit in a 747 or something like that, you can explain, we asked this question for this reason, to both prepare candidates for the interview that they're going to have, but also to be able to use the information you learned from an interview to tell if someone is reasonably qualified for a job. And then the other thing that I think is going to make any interview process helpful is actually having end-to-end communication throughout the interview process with the hiring manager. Where, like, quick varies, right? If at a smaller startup, you're talking like days to weeks. The size of companies that take many months to decide that they need to cut their employees, that you're going to be talking months. And so in that process, just having that human connection will help the person who's on the other side making a decision about whether they want to be hired by that company have the context they need to make it a reasonably informed decision. Yeah.
I mean, I want to pick up on the last thing that you said, because I see many startups that are still, at the small size or mid size, so they don't have hiring manager, like full-time hiring managers, and this is especially harmful for the communication side that you mentioned. I mean, there is no one really that is accountable and owner of that side of the relationship with the candidate, and so the candidates may have bad experiences, even though the actual interview funnel is reasonable, just because there is no human that is reliable and they can reach out to, that they know for any question. So I think that is something that people should really plan for, even though you don't have a hiring managers, but you decide that a certain share of the time of a senior engineer or an engineering manager goes into this activity, which is useful, even though you're like a 5-people team.
Yeah, even to clarify, I think whose ever responsibility it will be to kind of take care of that person whenever you start is the de facto hiring manager, even if that's not their official job. Otherwise, everyone's problem becomes nobody's problem, and that's not a good place to be.
Yeah, we have a role. It's actually from the people ops team, and she's our hiring coordinator. So she's the one usually that posts the job postings and things, but she's that communication between everyone. So our hiring tool that we use, the managers will go and vote on the people, like, do we want to interview this person or not? And she's the one that will take the candidates that we want to interview and schedule. One of the big thing is that scheduling phase, where it's pretty hard to try to get the right time for it in this calendar. One thing that we did do about that is we kind of have blocks that the specific managers will have. I guess I should probably loop back a bit, but for our hiring, you don't hire for your own team. Every engineering manager is part of that roster of people that we'll hire. So we kind of randomize the list, and it's 2 people, 2 managers hiring or doing the interview. We try to have 1 female manager per interview, but it's not always possible because we don't have enough. But just to remove that bias, right? Where you're not hiring for your own team, it makes it easier to be a bit more flexible on, well, I don't need this type of person. I don't need a front end expert, or I don't need someone that has more back end expert on my team, but they're still a great developer. So what we do is that we still maybe hire them and then put them on the right team afterwards. And that hiring coordinator really helps us with that. And being on the people side, like on the people ops, I think that probably helps too with that, having maybe a better voice, because not every engineering manager will speak with the same voice as a company voice.
Yeah.
So I think that helps also making sure that that experience with all the different candidates is kind of like standardized across the board.
Yeah, we do something. I mean, WISE is pretty big organization, so we do have a bunch of recruiters, a bunch of coordinators, a bunch of sourcers that will go and actively source candidates. We do something similar in terms of like, we don't necessarily go and hire for a specific team. So we would have headcount per team that's reviewed by the hiring managers, and the hiring manager usually will be the engineering lead of that team, or in particular, like the person, as Luis was saying, the person who would take direct responsibility for the new hire. We do hire like per what we call tribes, which is like groups of teams. So every group of team, and we may be like between 5 and 15 teams, depending on the domain, they would have different areas to check in particular with. Some teams may need more knowledge of low latency systems versus some teams may need more knowledge of, interfaces and customer experiences and all of that. We do tend to have a pool which varies across the organization. One thing that really helps, I think, once you become a bit bigger, is to really have an intentional hiring process, and like setting a rubric in which what are the things that you need to ask candidates, and what are the kind of answers, and where would they put that. So like, we have an engineering ladder, it's public, everybody knows what's expected from the level that you're at, but we also use that inversely while interviewing. We wouldn't hire for senior or mid. We would hire for candidates, and then they come in, and then we'll say, okay, so this candidate exhibit these traits. And, the more you are writing things, like the more it's clear and intentional, you can train more people easily to become part of the interview process because they know what's expected of them. And at the same time, it's easier to make a decision. Then towards the end of the process, we tend to pair up with a particular team, that person we think may be a good fit for, because, also from a candidate experience, you need to know who you're working with, right? I mean, I wouldn't be happy if I have an interview process and then I don't know who's going to be my direct manager until the very end of the process, because I may decide, hey, I don't really feel good vibe with the person and I want to pull out, and that's a waste of time for both sides.
And one thing I like about that is that you're not necessarily looking for those specific skills, but more about personality traits and that ability to learn, like all those things that makes a good developer. So like they might not have that experience of a senior has, but they have the aptitude and the attitude to be able to learn and get there. So you can still hire them at a lower level and let them grow in your company, as opposed to just picking the people that know that expertise that you're specifically looking for.
Yeah. And I love the bit about the using the career tracks and career ladder you have in place for hiring, because I speak with many companies who maybe are not very sure about introducing a career ladder because they're still at a small scale. But I found that one of the most practical and immediately useful ways of using a career ladder is in hiring. Even if you're a small team, you have to agree among the various people who do interviews, who recruit candidates, about what does it mean for somebody to be a senior engineer, what does it mean for somebody to be a good manager, and so on. And so it's a dual usage. You use it both internally and when you do hiring, and it's very important. So
yeah, it also comes in really handy. I mean, the successful byproduct of hiring people is they start working for you, and then you don't want to be kind of caught off guard to be like, oh crap, how do I make you successful here, right? It's going to be a smooth segue. And if you've created rubrics around the levels you have, it should map both to the manager and to the newly hired person of these are what expectations would be. Here's kind of where we think your strengths and opportunities are in this rubric. My job is to help you succeed and grow in this organization. And you, instead of having distinct processes, actually have connected all the different aspects. And then as someone continues to grow and perform, you can follow that same kind of backbone of the employee experience. And the same thing if they don't, you can start to be able to be like, look, we're having this conversation about how you need to do better in these areas for the same reasons that we interviewed you on, or the same reasons that we talked about when you started to. I'm a huge fan of them, especially there's so many. Like, I haven't checked out Wise's yet, but I'm sure it's great because I would follow Harsh into a burning building as well. That
I would agree with that.
There's like this preponderance of different things where you can kind of look a la carte for like, okay, I like this pattern, I like that pattern. How do we personalize it for our company that will help each organization define its own version of excellence, but then kind of back into like its own separate systems for it, where I mean, I'm aging myself a bit, but you used to kind of have to figure this stuff out, or people would like pass it behind the scenes to one another versus the kind of radical transparency that exists now.
I want to add something on this one. I mean, I was lucky enough at my previous job. I was CTO at a wealth manager. So I've been there for 5 years, as CTO for 3 years. So I've had a lot of chances to luckily kind of meld the organization and kind of making progress in things that I think would follow the strategic vision of the company and my way of thinking about tech. And we did implement a career ladder from scratch at that organization. And, you know, like it's an organization which is a fintech, not too techy in a way, I would say, but it's been very interesting and rewarding. And I think lots of people we hired, and you know, like, how do you track success? I think you should look at what you've done after you implement. So you do the ladder, you hire people, and they say, okay, how many people voluntarily left versus how many people involuntarily left the organization, and did we make the good hires and all of that? But it's a lot of effort to build the ladder, especially if you start doing in a company like when we did it at Monifam, we were like 35 engineers, 40 engineers. And, you know, the challenge, not only like you may have ideas of what people need to do, and that's great, but then how do you fit years of legacy of random job titles, for example, of expectation which are not met to reality, especially when people are perceived as more senior, they actually are, if you look at the ladder. That's very painful, but it's a pain that you have to endure to take the organization to the next level.
Yeah, I know we're not here to talk about the career ladder, but a quick thing to add, and I think like you're right, like doing it as early as possible is really important. And the key thing too is that you have to keep in mind that it will change. It's not you said it once and it's good forever. So just get it done first, then, you know, iterate on it. Just like everything, right? Just iterate on it.
Yeah, it's a big act of introspection, you know, for your company. Maybe you start simple with a set of principles, you know, are more general, and then you expand over time. It's and you discover these, you know, the things that do not really align across the various teams. And I mean, it's a great way of finding inconsistencies and different ways of people thinking. Not to say that actually going back to the interview process, many smart candidates actually ask for this sometimes, you know, ask for what my growth path would look like, what my journey could be in the company. And of course, answering by saying, actually, we don't have a career ladder. We don't know really. It's not a fantastic answer usually for candidates who ask. So yes, that's a great investment. But going very practical, when it comes to hiring engineers, what is your preferred workflow? I mean, even going into more specific things, are you a fan of lead codes or take-home assignments, or you really think it really depends on the team and the situation? Let's say you're joining a new team, mid-sized team, you have to set up, you know, a hiring process for hiring developers. What would you do?
So I'm doing this right now, so I can answer to that first.
Yes.
First of all, I feel like it depends is probably the answer to probably every question you've asked. So I'll cite that, and I'd like to trademark it, but I think it's prior art already. The truth is, if you know what you're looking for, then the tools will or will not make sense as a part of that. And that's the intersection of what you're looking for and what's important to your company. In some cases, if you think that just generating code in a separate tool gives you the signal you need to say whether or not someone is going to succeed in the role that you're creating, then that tool might be right for you. It also depends on the way that your employer wants to be perceived by applicants. If that is something that's consonant or dissonant, you got to keep that into effect. Ditto with the amount of human touch and subjectivity or objectivity. Personally, I've seen both really strong successes and really big fails from these tools, and it has to do more with what is the job and what's the employer's trying to present than it does with the tools themselves.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, I think I totally 100% agree with Luis when he says it depends, right? Because it depends really what you're optimizing for, right? You know, when you're hiring a volume, is so much different than when you're hiring one person in a 10 people team, right? I'm a big fan of having the person spending some time like coding. So like, you know, every company I've worked at where I had the same the hiring process, we had a kind of round of pair programming, whether it's in person or via Zoom. I think it's it also gives you insight, you know, what we were saying before about the personality traits of the candidate, right? Like, hey, you know, don't hire brilliant assholes. I stand by that mantra. And, you know, like pair programming will help you understanding. And, you know, also it's not about do you know how to invert a red-black tree or stuff like that. I think it's more about, hey, can you reason about the problem? Lots of the stuff that product companies are doing is not necessarily been solved before, right? And you want somebody that's able to think about problems and how to solve them rather than say, hey, I've done 500 lead code exercises. And, you know, I think that's an optimization for volumes. And I can understand why in some cases it can also make sense. But yes, like optimize for what you're hiring, spend time with the candidate, and please don't have a too long process for, you know, kind of also, for example, I've seen sometimes junior roles, very long process. I mean, I don't think it's a good use of time for anybody.
I have a quick follow-up question. So since you said let's not have a too long process, what's the right length for you? I mean, if you have to have a goal of a certain length, you know, of the hiring funnel from some person entering doing the actual application to hiring or not hiring decision, what do you think it's the right length?
You know, we track this internally, and it's a very tricky measure to track because sometimes you ask candidates availability and they will say, oh, I'm available next week, and then they will skew your measure. In an ideal world, yeah, it depends. Yeah. In an ideal world, if you ask me to kind of put a time frame, I would say that if you could finish a process start to end, and like in 2 to 3 weeks, that's great. Anything more than a month, it starts being a bit, you can feel it's tracked. And by the way, I've had the interview process that lasted 3 months and I still ended up taking the job. But, you know, that's also depending on the seniority of the job you're having. Like when I've interviewed at my current company, I had to speak to a lot of senior people. And as a result, the agendas are pretty difficult. So, but I would say, yeah, 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, like you're in a good place. Probably 1 year ago when everybody was hiring, it would be less, but I would say 2 to 4 weeks. Like,
yeah, I would agree with that. That's pretty much where we are, and we try to, like you said, there's a lot of things that are out of our control. Like when we're trying to book something with a candidate, like we try to be as flexible as possible. So we're not telling them this is your interview day. Like we kind of give them options. We have that flexibility. We hope that, you know, we're trying to be as nice as possible with our candidates. Same with our code test. It's a take-home code test, and we give them a week to complete it. It doesn't take that long to complete, but we understand that people have jobs, they have families, and sometimes they can only do it over a weekend. So we even ask them when they want to start it. So that adds at least a week to that process, which is not great. But again, hopefully the candidates understand that some of that time delay is on their plate. But for things like when the code test is submitted, we have 2 senior engineers that have to review it within a day. Like that's kind of how we process it. So as fast as we can do it on our part, we will do it as fast as possible to make that effort so that it's as short as possible.
Yeah, 2 to 4 weeks is actually a very common answer. And also, I think that if you're doing take-home tests, you cannot give less than 1 week anyway, because yes, as you said, people have their own things going on. So, but I also agree that they may understand that part of this delay that is on their side. You also have the problem of people maybe not taking the take home. You discover after a while you have lost a bit of time. You have some kind of churn in that part of the process, but it's natural. But I mean, personally, we've done a lot of take homes. I mean, as little as possible. We didn't want to, you know, take too much of people's time, just like very few hours of work. But that gave us, you know, a great standing point for having a good discussion about understanding better, you know, people attitude, people way of thinking about many things, especially if you can, you know, design the take home in a way that is relevant to what you're looking for, which ties back to Luis at the beginning. So yes, very sensible advice.
the review phase that we do. So once the engineers have reviewed the code test, we bring the candidates back and it's basically a live PR. That's kind of how we pitch it.
Yeah.
And we find that part is almost maybe more important than the actual code test, how they react to the feedback, how they can actually speak about the decisions that they made. That's really where we can gauge the seniority levels and that aptitude and the,
I actually agree that that part might be even more important, because actually one of the downsides, let's say, of the take home is that different people have different amount of time that they can spend on this. So you have to, reflect on the fact that there might be somebody who spent 15 hours on this, putting all the bells and whistles just because they could afford it, and versus somebody who could only spend like a couple of hours on that. And that really, and that conversation that you have after should really, sort out this and level up the field for people who have different, availabilities. But that said, yes, it's a great way.
On timing, I would say increasingly a good thing to pay attention to is the amount of your process that is dependent on the candidate's timeframe. Like, are they the one that's introducing a delay, as Jessy was saying earlier, versus if a candidate is saying like, hey, I want to meet with you tomorrow, and you're like, oh, we can't meet with you until a week from now, that not only the problem you can solve, but also represents that you're actually working against your own best interests in those cases.
Yeah, totally. So this was already great. I'm wondering if there are questions from the audience for people listening here. We can pick up a few questions, so I can go on with other questions as you prefer, guys. You can raise your hand, unmute yourself, feel free. Is there anyone who wants to break the ice? Okay, I
do
go
have
on.
a question for Luis. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
you said you're
yes.
actually, because we're not actively hiring right now, and I'm kind of curious if how you're seeing the market right now. Because from what I can see from LinkedIn, it seems like there's a lot more people looking for work. We know there's a lot of layoffs, and I'm kind of curious what your perspective of the market is now versus maybe 6 months ago, or maybe a year ago.
Let's come back to that.
Okay.
Because I see she has a question. We'll get to that first, and then I'll get back to it.
Yes. Okay.
I'm curious about how, I know this question might be, it depends, that might be the answer, but I'm just curious about how you're able to know for your organization, like you need more juniors or more seniors. Like, how do you know the levels that you need at any particular point in time? What kind of questions do you ask? What kind of framework do you use to know, okay, I want more juniors to fill in this role on this team, and or more seniors or more mid-level?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a few different ways to know. For us, we try to balance the teams. So where we have, our teams are very modular, and we can pretty much swap them. They're all about the same size, all about the same skill set in there. So we try to have at least one senior per team. We have kind of like 2 intermediate levels. So that senior person is usually the tech lead, kind of like helping everyone else. And then we'll have usually try to only have 1 junior person per team, because it's a bit of a, it takes time to coach and train them. And then everything else in between. So we have, like I said, 5 developers plus an intern per team. So that 5 developers, so that's usually 1 senior, 1 junior, and then whatever in between is usually the candidates growing into a different role, or yeah. So that's kind of, if we see that we don't have enough seniors, or like people are not leveling up, or that's usually kind of how we balance it. Just making sure the teams are well balanced.
To add up on that, this was one of the questions I've asked to one of my mentors in my past years, and she talked to me about kind of shapes, and it seems like what Jessy was describing is a diamond shape, right? So you have this a little bit at the bottom, little bit at the top, and then kind of a bit broader in the middle. One thing also, I think this is great, and I agree with Jessy in terms of like how many people can be supported on the team. You don't want to end up with a team of like 5 juniors and 1 senior. There's other 2 things I think that you need to consider. One is the kind of problem you're trying to solve at the organizational level. If what's the problem, and it's just a matter of being able to execute and have more more features coming out in a way. This is where junior person can help the most, because I would just they're very good at this is the task, it's very well known, and there's no kind of discovery happening. But when there's a lot of uncertainty, I would say probably you need to skew a bit more towards senior. And the other thing you have to consider is that usually the more senior you are in an organization, the more churn you would have, because sometimes you have ladders and you have senior people, and then as you go up, it's trickier and the organization have less spots. So usually if you look at churn across the company, people who are senior or above, they're more likely to leave to get other opportunities somewhere else. And as a result, you may want to hire more junior backfilling to kind of go up a bit. So these are two things that you need to look at as well, in my opinion.
There's also shout out to career ladders. So one thing we keep talking about how great they are. Insofar as seniors are expected to be mentoring other folks, it's something where you have to look at, are there people to mentor? Is this ecosystem in balance? It's almost always going to be cost advantageous, especially like Emanuele was saying about this idea of having, when you just need volume, or I think of this quite often, there's sometimes a large difference between high throughput backend systems versus more interface driven front end systems, that there's less of a, easily discernible difference in terms of how quickly you can rep things out. That in those cases, it's a more nuanced version of it depends, I guess. But you want to hire for what's missing, whether it's people to mentor or people that can move more quickly. People that like doing the work sometimes also factors into what is it junior for? Is it junior for my experience, junior for this technology, or anything else? Knowing that it's important to just make sure you're thinking about not just junior in terms of career length, but also junior with certain kinds of technologies as people make mid-career shifts or people come back to work after taking a leave, et cetera, too.
Awesome. Thank you. Very insightful.
Quick thing too on the junior side, they have fresh minds. They don't have ways of doing things that more senior people have. So often they're more malleable. You can train them a bit easier to what you need them to do, which is another advantage of junior developers.
Yeah, totally. So Luke, I see you raised hand by Luca. Luca, you want to ask a question?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm curious to know what you think about system design's interview, if it is something that is in your process, if you see any value in doing those. Thank you.
I do. It is. And the reason why is because I expect people who are in senior or principal roles to be designing systems. And I expect them to respond well to my bad ideas so that they can tell me that it is a bad idea. That's part of the interview process, to be like, okay, cool. I see that you've designed this cool microsystem or microservice architecture and we're doing this. Okay, should I just build a PHP app on top of all this kind of things? That seems like the best idea, right? And they should be able to say no, actually, for this reason or that reason, no matter what the fancy title somebody has is, because that's what's going to help that system survive over time. I
totally 100% agree with Luis. I think system design is also a very good way of engaging in conversation with your interviewer. Yeah. As everything in an interview, but you shouldn't take this as their value, they're judging what I produce, but it's more like, hey, let's work together and let's fix this. I'm not hands-on in my role right now. A little bit, because at Wise, we all try to be a bit hands-on, but I did have to do a system design interview during my interview process. And of course, I was a bit will I be able to pass this or not? But then it was great. It was a great opportunity for me to connect with an interviewer. And actually, also after I joined, I reached out to those people who did the system design run with me, and we kind of built already a connection. So it's a great way to have a conversation. Of course, it's good to be prepared. It's good to study, to do your homework. But yeah, I believe, like Luis said, I do also believe it adds value.
Yeah, we have a similar, so we use it really to know if it's a senior developer or not. That's the key thing. And we also have a bit of a trick in it where we preface it telling them we have a relational database and we're trying to solve this problem. The right answer really is to say you need a relational database. Neo4j or something like that. That's the answer we're trying to get them to say. but we can tell like if they're trying to make it work with what we told them, as opposed to providing the right solution. That kind of gives us a bit of an idea too, if they're going to, you know, just follow the line, or if they're actually going to think outside the box and provide the right answer, as opposed to working within the box.
Yeah.
One thing to know, or sorry, Luca, go ahead, you first.
No, I was just saying that I agree with everything you said. I think especially for people in senior roles, this is way more telling than code interviews. It's also where I expect these people to bring the most impact in the role usually, rather than, you know, solving algorithmic problems. I mean, at least I think in most companies it is the case. And it's true what Emanuele said. I mean, in many companies, even in management roles, you still have design interviews as part of the hiring process. I mean, in many big tech companies like Meta and others, you still have to do system design interviews. But the good thing is that with respect to coding exercises, that are pretty much, I mean, you either get them, or I mean, you have to have those practical skills. System design interviews are something where it's rare than a candidate just goes blackout. I mean, you can always discuss things. You can always have a way of have a good conversation, whatever the level of the candidate is. So you can have the same question and have valuable input from a senior engineer or an engineering manager in different ways, because you expect different things from a manager rather than and it's still valuable. So I agree. They're the most valuable interviews probably for technical roles. Sorry, Luis, go.
Cool. I was just going to say, it's also often okay to totally bomb that interview. Part of the interview process is to know what you don't know and to see how you react to this kind of feedback, whether it's nerves or just someone having a categorically bad solution to a problem. Oftentimes you're interviewing for both the what and the how. So you can say like, okay, cool, they don't have the knowledge for how to approach this from a systems perspective, but the way that they interacted with me, we were able to get to a solution. Even if maybe I was doing more of the driving and they were more a passenger, they were providing the kind of helpful information where they might not be leading a project, but they might be supportive as they're learning in that area too. Again, it always depends on what you're hiring for and how you're trying to complete your team.
I have a question, based on Luis's, the thing that he said, super interesting. So you might have come across a situation where, it's the point where you have to decide whom you have to hire. And let's say you have two cases, two people have boiled down to that. And one is, so let's say you're hiring for a senior management position. So, and one is, he's not so experienced, he or she is not so experienced, but his flow of thought process is really good. And there's another one who is really experienced, far more experienced, but his flow of thought and everything is not that great. But then you have boiled down to these two candidates. How do you make a decision at this point? Which one do you go for? What's the deciding factor? What is it that you're looking for at that point?
Who do you want to work with? The person that will learn, or the person that won't learn? It goes back to Emanuele's, don't hire smart assholes, right? Yes, they can solve the problem quickly, but nobody's going to want to work with them, and then it affects the full team, right? If there's someone that's going to be difficult to work with, yeah, they might be the smartest person, but if you're going to have people leave your team because of this person, definitely don't hire them.
Also, hire for people that aren't like the people you already have. If you've got a bunch of people who are really experienced but aren't quick on your feet, you don't want to hire another one. You want to hire the person that complements them, unless there's a damn good reason otherwise. So it's kind of similar to the question earlier that she had about like, when do you hire junior developers or not? Like if you have a team of all junior developers, you probably want to hire a senior developer to help them grow. And if you have a team of all senior developers, you should really strongly be considering adding junior developers to kind of help create some of that magic that happens in a different perspective on things too. Yeah.
I think it all depends on the problem you have at hand. So why you're hiring this person. I mean, if you can afford somebody who, for example, looks a little bit smarter but has something to learn, so you will have a longer cycle before that person will actually be helpful and be a net positive for what you needed them. And also, or you need somebody who does the job right now. Because you're in a hurry. This is a very important problem for your company, and also based on your team situation, kind of what Luis said, or even Jessy before, I mean, if you, for example, are invested in training junior people, you're very good at that. You know, you're efficient. You know, you can go for smart people who learn fast because you are somebody who teach them things very fast, or you're rather somebody who you don't feel very strong at that, and you feel people should bring their own things from home because they're not gonna grow, at least in that current situation, in that current team, etc. So yeah, pretty much depends.
And I have a sorry, follow-up question on, so you know, if you let's say if you're hiring a manager, obviously the manager needs to have a very good technical background, obviously, but then, you know, how do you measure the non-technical side of, let's say, how good is he with managing people to get things done? How good of a people's person is he? So, you know, what are the non-technical things that you look for in an interview, and what are maybe the questions that you ask to gauge that side of the person's personality, which is not technical?
So for us, we've never hired managers on the engineering side. We want to leave that open as a career path. But I do have a question. So I've helped other like the product team and design team and other teams to hire. And I do have a question I like asking for people to see their management skill. And I asked them to tell me a story of someone that they've mentored or coached that that is a success story. Maybe they were bad at something and they were able to coach them. And what I find with that question is that sometimes you get someone that just can't give you a straight up answer that they've actually helped someone. Or they say like, oh, I help everyone, right? And you're like, okay, you're not. But the people that, like, you know, they light up when they get excited about talking about this person that they helped to coach, and maybe they were struggling. And I've had people tell me like, oh yeah, I worked really hard with this person, they got better, but eventually they didn't quite get there and we still had to let them go, but they still were excited to talk about it, right? I was like, okay, that person has the right skills to be a manager.
Yeah, that's a great way. And I think that I may add this role playing. I mean, trying, you know, a few situations that maybe you have lived in your team, and trying to get the other people say what they would do in that situation of managing somebody, something that, you know, some recurring problem in your team, or something that is important for you. Doing some kind of this is actually the equivalent of, you know, system design interview, or maybe for engineers, like role playing real management situations. It's I think it's these two things. I mean, the letting them tell you their success stories, their story they had the happiest to tell you, and trying to put them in the shoes of somebody in your team and role playing some real situation that matters to you.
One thing I like to do as well, to totally agree, like check the passion, check what's the motivation behind doing the managerial role. I would add also two things. One is make sure they're kind of aligned, or they can align to company values. And I know some company values, some people may be a bit disillusioned about company values, but I think it's really, really important, especially as you grow, to keep the purpose and to keep like why we're here. I mean, I'm biased because when I work, we have a strong, everybody's so excited about what we're building, and everybody kind of lives by the values. And we always talk about customer, even in conversation in one-to-one, and this is not a recruitment pitch, but it's true. At the same time, for managers, I love to hear the stories of failure, because, you know, failure is inevitable. It's not a matter if it will happen. Failure will happen. It happens to everybody. And, you know, how do you react to that? And, you know, like, tell me about a difficult moment when, you know, you had to deal with something. And I heard lots of interesting story. One that comes to my mind recently, I heard somebody say, I hired one of my best friends and they weren't performing and I had to let them go. And, you know, that's hard. That's really, really hard. But at the same time, you have to think about not the single. Luca also raised his hand. Probably
happened to me, actually.
So, you know, and that is important to understand how people would react to this kind of high pressure. When you're a manager, this is stuff that can happen even without warning. So, you know, you need to be prepared for that, especially if you're a senior manager.
Yeah, this is a really good one. I think if someone's open to their failures, and, you know, I think this is a good check for ego, in my opinion. If you're more open, it tells, you know, I think it says a lot about a person if you're very open about your failures. Yeah, nice one.
Yeah, anyway, that exact situation happened to me. I had a good friend of mine that I hired. Actually, he came back in Italy from Berlin to join our company, and then he wasn't performing, and it was one of the worst experiences of my life, something that I will never forget. I mean, worse than, losing tons of customers, company failures. No, that was, more personal, heavier. So yes, if we take this out in an interview, you would bring me into tears, and the most personal I can get. Yeah. So I think, yeah. Sorry,
sorry. Go, Luca. You go first.
No, I was saying Jessy had a question a while ago about the current market situation for Luis or for whoever wants to answer.
Yeah, I can answer a bit around now, and also when I've seen this happen before. In terms of now, obviously there are, well, I think two things. One, I've been over the past couple decades working in the US market. I recently moved to Europe, so it's hard for me to compare what things were like then versus now. My role at Reforge previously, I wasn't actively hiring. I was more of a person who's kind of a hired gun for teaching a course. The thing I've noticed is usually, as it tends to be the case, like as the employer, you have the advantage. People are more interested in talking to you than they were before because there's fewer choices out there. But also with that, the quality of candidates tends to go up. It's hard when both quality and volume increase because you have to then figure out like, oh, do we need to do something like adding a coding test just to be able to manage the volume internally? So that's kind of where we're finding ourselves right now across the board. When I've seen this happen before, it's been kind of similar things where you have a lot of people who are looking for work. And this was when I was at Trulia, we were one of the few people hiring quite a bit. And we realized that not only did we have to be very specific in the levels that we wanted to hire, because we were hiring for a few, not hiring for many, but also make sure that we were really all locked in on the hiring criteria we had, like what essentially the rubrics were, so that we could easily resolve a situation where you had two people who were qualified for the role, and we couldn't just fall back to our previous pattern of hiring both.
So you said the quality also went up, not just the volume?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's partly because I think more people are just actively on the market. It's not to say whether or not the people who are hiring for who are applying.
I had this conversation with my CTO, and we were kind of trying to figure out if, with layoffs, usually you would think the lower performing people are being laid off first, right? So we were kind of under the impression that there would be a flood of lower quality candidates just because of those layoffs, but maybe that's a bad assumption.
It depends. I would say a couple things. One, performance is always relative to the organization. You can have someone who's not performing well in an organization who is eminently qualified for your organization. And second of all, not all companies use performance as an indicator in layoff decisions. For example, if they're laying off an entire department, they may or may not include the people who are impacted in opportunities elsewhere, either because legally they can't, as the case in some countries, but also because it's, I don't know, with any layoff, you have to also be able to stand up in front of the company for everyone who stayed and tell the story around why and how too. There are always people who are underqualified on the market, and it's a matter of the same tools you use. That also applies to there are many more people who are unqualified too, just to be clear.
Yeah, I also think that performance is not necessarily correlated with layoffs, especially with big tech. I mean, you see entire departments and product areas being laid off, and in those cases, I mean, it's not like the company tries to pick the best people and rotate them in and put them in different spaces. They are just impacted like everybody else. I mean, I know a few people that were laid off, and they had like glowing reviews just recently in big tech. So they were incredibly surprised to be laid off, but they were impacted because they worked in a division that was not revenue generating. And so that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, as a hiring manager, I think it's useful I've actually sparred on this because I am cynical and I believe that companies, given the opportunity, will lay off the underperformers when they can. But to understand the situation behind the layoff for that company, usually the smaller the company is, the more they'll try and use that as a way to do the thing that they didn't have the discipline to do before around managing for performance. When it's larger and you have entire departments affected, kind of to Luca's point, it is more likely that you have people that were really thriving in the organization, but there's just not a job for them anymore there.
Yeah. So guys, we are a little bit over time. I don't know if you have time for a last question, if there is any. Otherwise, we can wrap it up.
Before any question or before wrapping up, I think we should definitely take a group Zoom selfie and post it to the community.
Yes,
let's definitely do that.
Yes, I will do that.
Luca, do you want to do it? You're better at that historically.
I'm not sure based on what, but yeah, I mean, let's pretend I'm better. Okay, so I will do a selfie here. I mean, that is just a screenshot of the Zoom page. I don't think it's anything fancy. You all smile. Great. Thank you guys, and thank you just for remembering this. Very important to let other people in the community feel the FOMO.
Feel the jealousy.
The next events, exactly.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, both guests and people who joined, asked great questions. I mean, we will publish the whole video, so even those who were not here will see all of our brilliance, and we'll publish in the other channels. So thank you all, and see you next time.